When my mother-in-law said I wasn't welcome to the Christmas party, I smiled and calmly left. I made one call, and by New Year, their house was put on sale by me. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to John Green from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. The snow was soft that year. One of those Decembers where everything looks quieter than it feels, and the stillness fools you into thinking people are kinder than they are. I stood on the stone path leading up to their house, her house, with a bottle of red in one hand and a gift bag looped around my wrist. The porch light was warm. The kind of golden glow that says welcome home to some, but to me it flickered like a warning. I had chosen the wine carefully, and the scarf inside the gift bag was hand-stitched in her favorite color. I remember that, because I thought of her while making it, stitch by stitch. I gave her a softness she never gave me. That night, I truly believed I was walking into a small kind of forgiveness. That maybe, finally, I'd be allowed to belong. I didn't knock right away. I stood there, the way you do when you want someone to open the door, just because they know you're there. I could hear music inside, Dean Martin maybe, laughter, a clinking glass. I imagined them rearranging their faces when they saw me. Surprise first, then awkwardness, then that polite nod she always wore like a mask she hated. But it wasn't her who opened the door. It was my husband. And the second I saw his eyes, I knew. Something low and nauseous settled in my gut. His mouth said, "Hey," like he'd just seen a neighbor, not a wife. He stepped out and gently pulled the door almost closed behind him. I could still see the edge of the tree in the living room, all silver and crystal and untouched. Not a single present beneath it had my name on it. "She doesn't want you here," he said quietly, like it wasn't him talking. "She said tonight is just for family." His eyes wouldn't meet mine. They slid somewhere behind me, like he couldn't bear to see what this would do. I laughed, a sound so dry it didn't echo. "She said." I asked, "And what did you say?" The silence between us told me everything. I wasn't here by accident. I had been excluded, carefully, deliberately. He didn't forget to tell me. He chose not to. I should have felt rage, but I didn't. I felt clarity, cold, sharp, sobering. I handed him the gift bag. "Give this to her," I said, and set the wine bottle gently on the porch railing. Then I turned around and walked back through the snow, letting my footprints mark the distance between their world and mine. In the car, my hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I remember staring at the steering wheel for a few seconds, not starting the engine. The world outside was lit by cheap reindeer lights and the kind of cheer that only really exists on the surface of things. I thought about how much energy I'd spent trying to be accepted. I thought about the dinners where I stayed quiet so she wouldn't say I was difficult. The birthdays where she gave everyone else thoughtful gifts and handed me a grocery store candle. The way she used the word, "your people," when she talked about my side of the family. I had swallowed so many small insults I couldn't remember the taste of my own voice. But that night, something shifted. I took out my phone and called one person, the only person who had ever warned me not to marry into that family. My aunt. She picked up on the second ring. "Sweetheart," she said, "everything all right?" And I told her, calmly, that I was done, that it was time, that I wanted to know if the deed was still in my name, if the inheritance from my father's side, the one they'd begged me to let them use for the house, still had any legal threads left to pull. There was a pause. Then she said, "Let me make a few calls." I remember the way she said it. No questions, no dramatics. Just quiet readiness. Like she'd been waiting for me to wake up. I ended the call and placed my phone on the passenger seat, watching the house fade in the rearview mirror. In that moment, I didn't feel like I'd been pushed out. I felt like I'd finally stepped out of something rotten, something that looked like tradition but smelled like control. I drove in silence. No music, no headlights on the back roads. Just the rhythm of the tires and the frost building up on the windows. Somewhere inside me, grief stirred. Not because I'd lost anything, but because I finally understood I never had it to begin with. Not love, not respect, not even a place at the damn table. But I also understood something else, that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it lets itself be underestimated. And sometimes it smiles politely, says Merry Christmas, and leaves the party early. Because revenge, if you do it right, doesn't need an audience. It just needs the right kind of silence. I didn't answer his calls for 3 days. The first one came an hour after I left, the kind of half-hearted attempt people make to feel better about themselves. He didn't leave a voicemail. The next day, I got a text, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I wanted to see how long it would take before he came to me in person, looked me in the eye, and acknowledged what he'd done. He never did, and neither did she. There was no apology, no explanation. Just silence, as if I had quietly deleted myself from the narrative and they found that convenient. That suited me just fine. I went to work, came home, and answered no one. I moved like a shadow through the days, not in mourning, but in transition. It was fascinating to see how quickly they adjusted to my absence. His family always treated inclusion like a performance anyway. Perfectly decorated tables, staged photos, polite cruelty. It didn't take long for them to fill the gap I left with smiles. One look at social media told me everything I needed to know. There she was, my mother-in-law, holding court in her living room, surrounded by people who pretended not to notice I wasn't in the frame. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at that picture longer than I should have, until I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes. Then I logged out and made my next call. My aunt connected me with her lawyer, a sharp woman named Celeste who spoke in clean sentences and never asked twice. She remembered the old inheritance clause immediately. "It's your father's legacy," she said. "You were generous to let it go the first time. You don't have to be generous again." I asked if I could still pull the rug out from under them, legally speaking. She replied, "You never laid the rug down in the first place." They did, without reading the fine print. I liked her instantly. I gave her the green light to investigate. She requested copies of the original documents, the joint inheritance paperwork, the house title. It turned out my name was still tethered to one thing they had forgotten to untangle, one clause that could turn everything inside that house into someone else's problem. That clause, buried in the back of an estate contract, had never been transferred properly. My signature had been required to finalize the trust shift. I had been 18 when I signed most of the original paperwork, and too in love to ask questions. But one document, the one that dealt with the secondary beneficiary structure, was missing a single form. It had been pending, tucked away in a drawer, and then forgotten when the house went up in their name. They assumed it was done, but in the eyes of the law, it wasn't. Celeste explained it like a quiet landmine. Technically, the trust still held a controlling interest in the deed. And guess who controls the trust now? Her voice had the faintest smirk in it. "You have every right to sell." I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear and let the truth settle in my chest like a slow warmth. For years, I had twisted myself to be small enough to fit into their mold. But now, without raising my voice or breaking a single rule, I held the match to everything they thought they owned. The power didn't come from fury, it came from leverage. The kind they forgot I had because they never saw me as more than an accessory to their son. And he had always been a bystander in his own life. His silence was not neutral, it was complicity, disguised as passivity. I realized then that I didn't hate him. I pitied him. And I was done saving men who refused to stand. I stayed gone. Through New Year's Eve, through the first week of January. When he texted again, "We need to talk," I replied with a single sentence, "Please direct all further communication to my attorney." He didn't respond after that. My aunt called me that same night to say, "I'm proud of you." I didn't know how to receive that, so I just said thank you and cried quietly after we hung up. Not from sadness, just the release of holding everything together for too long. When I woke up the next morning, it was snowing again. I walked outside with coffee in one hand and nothing in the other. No guilt, no apology rehearsed. I breathed in the cold, and it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. The house was already being listed by the second week of January. Celeste moved fast. She had no interest in dragging things out, and neither did I. The paperwork was filed cleanly, the listing price was competitive, and the agent didn't blink when I said I wanted it sold without their knowledge until the last legal moment. "Won't that burn some bridges?" she asked. I replied, "I didn't burn them. I just stopped pretending they were bridges." She nodded and said nothing more. The control I felt wasn't loud or vengeful. It was precise. Measured. The kind of control you reclaim after years of pretending you were fine. I watched from a distance as they lived on unaware, still smiling in their curated world. I knew it wouldn't last. The countdown had started. One afternoon, while the papers were being finalized, I went to the house. Not to speak to anyone. Just to see it one last time before the foundation of their world shifted. I parked down the street, walked slowly past like a stranger. There were still wreaths in the windows, still fake candles flickering in the panes. And on the porch, half buried in snow, was the wine bottle I'd left that night, untouched, unloved, like me. I picked it up, wiped the snow from the label, and tucked it under my arm. That bottle had never belonged there. And neither had I. There's something oddly peaceful about erasure, when you stop trying to be remembered and start focusing on what it means to be free. In the weeks after the listing went live, I didn't look back. I let the past rot behind me like fruit left too long in the bowl. I worked late, ate dinner standing up. I stopped answering calls from mutual friends who wanted to stay neutral. Neutrality is a privilege, and I was done making space for people who only spoke up once damage control was necessary. I could feel it. This quiet version of myself hardening into something unrecognizable, even to me. And I liked it. I liked the cold. I liked the quiet. I liked who I was becoming when I stopped asking permission to exist. My phone was a graveyard of unsent messages. Some I wrote to him. Some I wrote to her. None were ever delivered. One of them just said, "Do you even know how much I swallowed for you?" Another read, "You always made me feel like a guest in my own life." I never hit send because I realized something crucial they didn't need to understand. That was never the point. The truth is, some people only respect boundaries when they bruise themselves against them. So I let the silence speak for me. It was louder than anything I could have said. When you stop explaining, they have no script left to control you with. Just confusion. Just discomfort. I think they assumed I was fragile, that I'd eventually crawl back, tail tucked. But they mistook quiet for weakness. That was their first mistake. There were days I woke up and still expected to see his keys in the dish by the door. His slippers. That pair of socks he always left balled at the foot of the bed. I'd spent so long orbiting his routine that it took time to remember which parts of my life were actually mine. It wasn't just the house I was reclaiming. It was the hours, the habits, the choices. I started running in the mornings, not to lose weight or to clear my head, but to take up space. Real space. I liked the rhythm of my own breath. I liked the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement with no one to explain it to. I began to notice things again. Sunlight on the walls, the way coffee tastes when it's hot and not forgotten. I stopped dimming. I didn't tell anyone about the sale. Not even my closest friend, Mina, who would have been the first to clap and the last to judge. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. It was that I wanted this part of my life to be mine. Entirely mine. For once, I didn't want to narrate my healing or justify my choices. I didn't want to share screenshots or ask for validation. The deepest parts of recovery are solitary. It's not the crying on the floor people glamorize. It's the quiet steadiness of becoming someone who doesn't beg for scraps anymore. When I passed mirrors, I started recognizing the woman looking back. Not prettier, not stronger, just more real. I used to avoid eye contact with my own reflection. Now I held it. Late one evening, I opened the drawer where I kept old cards, anniversary ones, birthday notes, the occasional just because he'd scribbled out when guilt outweighed inertia. I read each one like they were written to someone else. In a way, they were. He had fallen in love with a version of me that apologized for taking up space. A woman who waited to be told she mattered. I wasn't angry at her, but I did mourn her. She had worked so hard to belong to a family that saw her as an intrusion. She had cooked, decorated, complimented, folded herself inward. I burned the cards in a ceramic bowl on the balcony. One by one. No tears. Just ash. Smoke curled into the night, air like breath finally exhaled after years of holding it in. The house started getting offers faster than expected. Celeste forwarded me the first email with a short note. "We're in motion." It felt surreal, seeing that address, that kitchen, that porch, all lined up in glossy real estate photos. She looked beautiful, sterile, loveless, and soon, she would belong to someone else. I thought I'd feel triumph. Instead, I felt a steady kind of closure. That house had never been my home. It had been a stage, and I had played the part. But now the lights were off. The curtains were closed, and no one was left clapping. I kept the listing open on my screen for a while, watching strangers walk through her in video tours. Watching her be emptied. That felt right. There was a voicemail from him I didn't delete. He left it around the same time the house was going live. His voice was unsure, as if practicing lines. Hey, I heard something about the house. I just want to understand what's going on. I thought maybe we could talk. Then silence. Then a breath. Call me, okay? He didn't say he missed me. He didn't say he was sorry. He said he wanted to understand. That was always the issue. He didn't listen unless I was explaining, and by then, it was too late. I didn't call back. I didn't even press play again. I just saved the voicemail as a reminder. People don't change when they lose you. They change when they lose the version of you that made their life easy. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd sit at my kitchen table and write. Not letters. Not revenge fantasies. Just truths. I wrote about the time she told me I'd never quite fit the aesthetic of their family portraits. I wrote about how he once asked me to wear something less loud to dinner. I wrote about the way I held my breath in that house, as if exhaling too hard would crack the glass. Writing didn't fix anything, but it helped me remember. And remembering helped me let go. Not with fire. Not with vengeance. Just with the kind of finality that says, I was there. I saw everything. And I chose to walk away before I forgot who I was. It was a Tuesday when the sign went up. White post, red letters, angled just enough to catch the eye from the sidewalk. For sale. I didn't put it there, but I knew the exact minute it happened because Celeste sent me a photo from the curb. The irony made me smile. She was standing in the same spot I had stood that Christmas Eve, wine in hand, not yet unwelcome. The porch looked exactly the same. Except this time, it wasn't me waiting to be let in. It was them, standing inside their own house, clueless that the locks were already changing, just not in the way they'd expect. I didn't warn them. There was no call, no courtesy heads up, no warm preamble to soften the blow. They didn't give me that dignity when they closed the door in my face, so I returned the favor with precision. The paperwork was complete, the listing legal, the authority mine. They had no grounds to fight it, no proof that the clause had been signed, no leverage to claim ignorance. The house had never fully been theirs. And now it wouldn't be anyone's for long. I imagined her walking out to get the mail, catching the edge of the sign from the corner of her eye. I pictured her stopping, blinking, maybe even laughing at first. That brittle, condescending laugh she used when people told her no. I wondered how long it took before she realized it was real. The first message came from my husband. Well, though the paperwork hadn't caught up to the truth yet. It was one line. What did you do? Not even a hello. Not even a question mark. I didn't answer. He followed with another message. Mom is freaking out. She says the house is being listed. Tell me this is a mistake. That made me laugh. A mistake. As if the years I spent swallowing humiliation had been a clerical error. As if being told I wasn't family had just slipped out of her mouth by accident. I wanted to reply. This isn't a mistake. It's a signature. It's a clause. It's a silence I stopped breaking. But I didn't reply at all. Let them stew in the confusion. Let them feel the delay I had lived with for years. They showed up the next morning. Both of them. I saw the car pull up through the peephole. She didn't wait for him. Stormed up the stairs, pounding on the door like she still owned the world. I let her knock for a full 30 seconds before opening. I didn't invite them in. Just leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand, robe still tied at the waist. Her eyes were wild. He stood behind her, hands in his pockets, mouth tight. What is this? She demanded, waving a printout of the listing like it was forged. Tell me this is some kind of mistake. You don't have the authority. Actually, I interrupted. I do. You'd know that if you'd ever bothered to read the trust documents instead of just assuming I'd disappear. She blinked. Not because she didn't believe me, but because she suddenly did. He stepped forward, trying for diplomacy. We didn't know, he said. We thought everything had been signed. His voice was low, like he didn't want to wake a sleeping giant. This affects a lot of people. My siblings, the grandkids. Can we just talk about this? I stared at him for a moment, quiet. You had your chance to talk, I said. You chose to say nothing when it counted. This isn't punishment. It's consequences. His mother scoffed, arms crossed like a shield. You don't get to do this out of spite. It's not spite, I replied calmly. It's structure. Something your family never had until now. I could see the edges of her cracking, shock giving way to fear, fear tilting into rage. I didn't flinch. They didn't yell. Not really. She raised her voice once, something about legacy, about what people would say, about how this made her look. That last one made me tilt my head. You're worried how this makes you look? I asked, the laugh curling in my throat. You're the one who told your son to exclude his wife on Christmas Eve. You're the one who said I wasn't family. That's on record, by the way. Mina heard it. You said it clearly, proudly. And now you're surprised I believed you. Her mouth opened, then shut. She turned to her son, as if expecting him to jump in. But he didn't. And that silence, that single, stupid silence, was the loudest confirmation of everything I'd ever suspected about him. She left without slamming the door. That would have required confidence. She just walked away, jaw tight, the printout balled in her fist. He lingered. He looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize, like the woman who used to make excuses for his family had been replaced. I suppose she had. You're really going through with this? He asked. The house? Everything. I nodded once. You could have stopped it, I said. All you had to do was choose me. Once. But you didn't. And now I don't owe you anything, not an explanation, not a place to land, not even the decency of a warning. He took that like a punch. Said nothing. And then he left too. I closed the door and leaned against it, breath steady. It was done. The confrontation had come and gone, and I hadn't shaken. That mattered more to me than winning. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redefinition. For years, they had told me who I was: sensitive, dramatic, overreacting. They had shaped me into someone malleable, someone quiet enough not to disturb their traditions. But I wasn't her anymore. I had rewritten the rules, and for the first time, they were playing catch-up. I walked back to the kitchen, refilled my coffee, and let the silence fill the room without apology. The war was over. But the reckoning? That was still coming. The listing went live that Thursday. No more pre-approvals, no conditional drafts. Just a clean, public notice. The house was for sale, active and visible to anyone with an internet connection. I didn't send them the link. I didn't have to. They found it anyway, probably through one of her many obsessive neighborhood watch forums or a well-meaning family friend. By Friday morning, I was getting texts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. What's going on? Is this for real? Aunt Naomi is saying you're trying to ruin the family. I ignored them all. Let her spin whatever story she needed. The truth would land harder in silence, where guilt echoes louder than words. The next attempt came in the form of nostalgia. A package on my doorstep. No note. Just a white box tied with ribbon. Inside were old photos from our wedding, a monogram towel from our first Christmas, and the dinner menu I'd handwritten the first time I hosted Thanksgiving in that house. I stared at it for a long time. At the paper stained with wine, the slight grease mark near the pumpkin bisque. My handwriting was smaller back then, almost hesitant. I remembered that night. I'd worn green velvet and earrings I couldn't afford. I spent hours on that meal. She told me afterward the bread was a little dry, and I had smiled. I had thanked her. I had wanted her approval so badly it tasted like metal. I dropped the whole box into the trash, not out of spite, but clarity. Sentiment is only worth keeping if it's rooted in truth, and nothing in that box reflected the truth of what happened in that house. They were relics of performance. Moments I had twisted myself into someone palatable, digestible, easier to love. She wasn't sending me memories. She was sending me bait, an invitation to rewrite history, to question my own clarity. But I didn't bite. I wasn't the same woman who cried quietly in bathrooms because I didn't know how to stand up to a mother-in-law who policed the way I laughed. I wasn't the wife who defended a man who only held my hand when no one was looking. Those versions of me were buried. This one didn't ask for room, she took it. Saturday morning, I got the email I'd been expecting. A formal request for mediation, thinly veiled as a family discussion, but with legal subtext tucked neatly between the lines. Celeste reviewed it and replied on my behalf. Polite, direct, absolute, no mediation. The transaction is lawful. The trust remains under my client's control. The sale will proceed. She didn't even flinch. I loved that about her. She didn't let emotion muddy what was structural. I thanked her, and she replied with a short note. They're unraveling. Stay still. That line stayed with me. Not because it gave me power, but because it reminded me how easily power is lost when you chase people's comfort over your own conviction. I had done that for too long. Not anymore. They tried to come by one more time. This time, it was just her. Alone. Dressed like she was going to church. Pearl earrings. A long wool coat. She stood outside my door for a full 2 minutes before I opened it. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She cleared her throat and held out a letter. Handwritten. On her expensive cream stationery. I wanted to say this face to face, she said, but I figured you might not want to listen. I didn't take the letter. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You're right." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I made mistakes," she continued, "but this is cruel." I smiled then, a slow, unblinking kind of smile. "No, what you did was cruel. This is clean." She didn't like that. Her face shifted, grief folding into anger. "You're punishing all of us for a bad moment." I laughed, the sound soft and ugly. "A moment," I said. "You built a legacy of exclusion. A full script of micro-cuts and silences. You smiled in public and dissected me in private. You called me family when it looked good and erased me when it didn't. The only difference now is I stopped playing the role." Her lip trembled. For a second, I saw her human. Then the mask snapped back on. "You'll regret this," she said. "When the dust settles, you'll see what you've lost." I leaned in just slightly. I already saw. That's why I'm doing this. I closed the door before she could respond. I stood there afterward, my hand still on the doorknob, heart slow but firm. That was the last conversation I ever had with her. No more scripts. No more double meanings. Just the raw truth, handed back like a debt paid in full. The silence after she left felt different than the ones before. Not empty, earned. I turned away from the door, poured myself a glass of water, and watched the light shift through the kitchen window. It was nearly spring now. You could feel it in the air. That low vibration of something changing. Something soft breaking through. And for once, I didn't dread it. I welcomed it. That evening, Mina came over with wine and silence. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to solve anything. Just poured 2 glasses and sat beside me on the floor. We watched nothing on TV for hours, the screen flickering but unwatched. At one point, she looked over and said, "You look different." I smiled. "I feel different." And I meant it. Not lighter. Not healed. Just clear. Like I had walked through a long, windowless hallway and finally stepped into air that belonged to me. The confrontation wasn't a climax. It was a ritual. A final setting down of weight that had never been mine to carry. And it was almost over. I didn't hear from them after that. Not directly. But the fallout came like clockwork, just delayed enough to feel rehearsed. The first cracks showed in social media posts. Vague captions from extended family pray for peace in divided homes. Holidays aren't the same when people lose perspective. Subtweets wrapped in scripture, all of them missing the mark. It was never about peace. It was about power. And I had dismantled theirs with nothing more than paperwork and silence. The house hadn't even sold yet, but the erosion had already begun. Not the walls. The narrative. The version of events they kept tight for years was unraveling, thread by thread. Mina forwarded me screenshots from a cousin's group chat. They were speculating, filling in the gaps. She always seemed cold. I think she wanted control from the start. Why would she do this to Naomi? I read each one with detachment. It wasn't anger I felt. It was distance. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about the version of me Naomi had built like a scarecrow, stiff, joyless, ungrateful. They never asked what it felt like to be told to wait in the kitchen during family photos, or how often I was edited out of stories she retold for applause. No one remembered the way I used to memorize everyone's coffee order just to feel useful. But I remembered. And remembering meant I never had to explain again. The family began to splinter in quiet ways. One of Naomi's daughters called me unexpectedly. We'd never been close. Too many years of side comments and awkward silences. But her voice on the line was different this time. Tired. "I just want you to know," she said. "Not everyone agrees with how she handled things." I waited. Some of us, we saw it. We just didn't say anything. I said nothing in return. Because silence wasn't permission, and observation without action is still complicity. But I didn't hang up. I let her speak. She didn't apologize, not directly. But I could hear it in the way her voice cracked near the end. She's falling apart, you know. I almost said good. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, so was I. That call stayed with me longer than I wanted. I told myself it didn't matter. What she said, what they believed, what image they were trying to restore. But the truth was more complicated. Part of me wanted the full confession. The family-wide admission that they'd been cruel. That they'd watched it happen. That they'd let her dictate who belonged and who didn't. But closure doesn't always come in confession. Sometimes it comes in absence. And their silence now, the disarray behind their eyes, the way their voices faltered when they tried to retell the story without their scapegoat, that was enough. I had removed the keystone from their architecture, and the house of lies was swaying. The actual house, ironically, was doing just fine. Multiple offers. Above asking. A young couple with a baby on the way submitted a letter. Said they wanted to raise their family there, make it a real home. I smiled when I read it. Not because I was sentimental, but because I knew they wouldn't see the ghosts. They'd fill the rooms with laughter, not rules. No one would judge the wrong pie crust or the laugh that echoed too loud. That house deserved better, too. I signed the papers that afternoon. The sale would close in a matter of weeks. Celeste handled the last details. Are you sure you don't want to notify them yourself? She asked. You're legally clear. I nodded. Let the closing date speak for me. I didn't attend the final walkthrough. I didn't need to. The house wasn't mine anymore, not in memory, not in paper. But I did walk past it one last time. At night. Hoodie up. Hands in my coat pockets. The porch light was off. A wind chime hung by the eaves. New, probably the agent's idea. The wreath was gone. No more curated perfection. Just a shell waiting to be filled by something genuine. I stood across the street for a minute and whispered goodbye. Not to the structure, but to the version of myself who once begged to be let in. She was always waiting on thresholds, hoping for warmth. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need any of it. In the end, the story they told about me changed shape. It had to. I became the bitter wife, the ungrateful daughter-in-law, the one who weaponized a legal loophole out of spite. That version fit better for them. It let them grieve the house without questioning why I had the power to take it in the first place. It let Naomi cry to friends and say she blindsided us, as if I hadn't been invisible for years. But I let them keep that version. Because the people who mattered, the ones who'd seen me crawl out of that silence and still held space, knew the truth. And the truth was quiet, unapologetic, unshakable. After the sale closed, I bought myself a small ring. Not expensive, just simple, silver, subtle. A promise to myself, not to anyone else. I wore it on the middle finger of my left hand. Not as rebellion, as reminder that I was never too much, that I was never too late, that I had always been whole, just camouflaged inside someone else's idea of acceptable. Some people burn bridges. I built exits. Quiet, sharp, irrevocable ones. And I didn't look back to see who followed. I thought it was over after the sale closed. I braced myself for noise, lawsuits, threats, maybe some final tantrum disguised as reconciliation, but what came instead was quiet. Too quiet. That particular brand of silence where you know someone is recalculating, not retreating. Still, I moved on. Slowly, carefully, in my own time. I started a new morning ritual, warm water, no phone until after breakfast, and a walk around the block without headphones. Not because I feared them anymore, but because I didn't want their voices in my head, even in memory. I was reprogramming the way I inhabited my own life. Day by day, I was getting louder in the places they had tried to mute. Then, 2 weeks later, Mina sent a message. Check your email. You're going to want to sit down for this. Attached was a forwarded chain from Naomi's church mailing list. Apparently, in a spectacularly misjudged bid for sympathy, she'd sent out a prayer request riddled with half-truths about the house, her estranged daughter-in-law, and how betrayal runs deep in families that lose God. But the response she got wasn't what she expected. Someone replied, all caps, bold text, and unapologetic candor. It was her older sister, a woman I'd met only once at our wedding, who had barely spoken a word but locked eyes with me across the reception hall like she knew a version of my story. Now, she was the one telling hers. The email read like a wound being lanced. She spoke of growing up under Naomi's shadow, of small cruelties, hushed jealousy, and lies that never quite unraveled because Naomi always controlled the room. You didn't lose the house because of betrayal, she wrote. You lost it because you built it on someone else's bones. You taught people how to treat her. You taught your son how to disappear. And now you're mad she learned how to leave. I read that paragraph twice. Then again, each line landed with a kind of precise, moral violence. The kind I'd only ever dreamed of delivering, but never could, not without being dismissed as bitter. But this couldn't be ignored. It came from within their walls. I sat with that email like it was a sacred text, because in a single, unexpected volley, it confirmed what I had always suspected but never dared to say aloud. That Naomi hadn't just been cold. She'd been calculated. Her cruelty was generational, patterned, passed down, honed over decades like a family heirloom. It wasn't just me. It was anyone who didn't fit her image, anyone who challenged her spotlight. And suddenly, the picture shifted. The story wasn't about a daughter-in-law who fought back. It was about a woman who broke a lineage of control by refusing to collapse. My actions hadn't been revenge. They'd been resistance. And the house, that was just the symbol. The battleground was always me. The fallout from that email spread fast. More relatives replied, quietly, cautiously. Stories trickled in. Cousins who remembered being excluded from birthday dinners. Nieces who said Naomi mocked their mothers behind closed doors. Even her son, my ex, wrote a short, stunned message to the thread. Just one line, I didn't know. And I believed him. That was the tragedy of it. He really didn't. He'd been groomed into obedience, taught to read the room by watching her face. I'd spent years blaming him for not choosing me, but now I saw the fuller picture. He hadn't chosen her either. He'd just never been taught how to leave. And while that softened something in me, it didn't change the outcome. Compassion didn't require reunion, only understanding. Mina and I sat on my balcony that night, sipping wine like we had at the beginning. She didn't say much, just kept glancing at me like she could see the tectonic plates shifting under my skin. You okay? She asked once. I nodded. Yeah, I thought I was fighting for dignity. But it turns out I was interrupting a legacy. She exhaled, slow and deep. And thank God you did. I thought about that. About the ripple effect of one refusal. Of what it means to be the person who breaks the pattern instead of repeating it. No monument marks that kind of work. But it matters. It echoes. It saves people you'll never even meet. The next morning, I wrote a letter. Not to Naomi. Not even to him. To myself. The version of me who had stayed quiet, who had tiptoed around eggshell egos and held back tears in guest bathrooms. I told her she had done enough. That she didn't have to prove anything anymore. That leaving wasn't failure, it was fluency. Knowing when to stop explaining. Knowing when to walk away not because you're angry, but because your peace is more sacred than their permission. I didn't keep the letter. I didn't need to. Writing it was the release. The closing of a loop I'd been caught in for far too long. And just like that, the unraveling was complete, not with fire, but with truth. Not with screaming, but with steady, inherited silence finally cracked open. Naomi would survive this, of course. People like her always do. They mold the narrative, recalibrate their charm, reframe the facts. But what she wouldn't recover was her control. That part was gone. And in its place, I had planted something unshakable, not revenge, not redemption. Just reclamation. Of my story. Of my worth. Of the voice they taught me to dilute. The house was sold. The silence was broken. And the inheritance? It was never the deed. It was the decision to end it with me. I never got a thank you. Not for the years I stayed silent. Not for the dinners I hosted or the gifts I remembered when they forgot mine. Not for the time I covered their property taxes because Naomi didn't want to dip into her emergency fund. And I didn't expect one. Gratitude had never been their language. Control was. Approval was currency, doled out in microscopic praise only when someone had been properly diminished first. But the more distance I put between myself and their rituals, the more I realized I no longer craved what I used to. I didn't need to be chosen by people who only knew how to love conditionally. I had finally learned how to choose myself. Months passed. Quietly. No drama. Just absence, like the hum of a refrigerator that goes still after years of background noise. And in that stillness, something unexpected bloomed. Not joy, exactly, but space. I started doing things I never used to let myself enjoy. I painted a wall in my apartment navy blue. I bought flowers on Thursdays. I sat in cafes and read without performing solitude for anyone. There were no passive-aggressive comments about how I sure liked to be alone or how my taste was a little modern. No one corrected my choices. No one measured my comfort against their discomfort. I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I understood that didn't mean abandoned. It meant uninterrupted. I got a postcard from the new owners of the house. The real estate agent must have passed along my forwarding address. A handwritten note in neat cursive. "We love it here. Thank you for entrusting us with it." There was a photo attached. A baby on the porch steps. A dog sleeping in the sun. The windows were open. I stared at that image for a long time. Not because I missed it, but because I finally didn't. That house had been a fortress of control for Naomi, a stage for performance. But now it belonged to people who would fill it with untidy laughter and Sunday morning chaos. That was the real legacy I left behind, not the structure, but the possibility that love could finally exist there without conditions. I ran into him once, by accident, at the market. He looked older, though maybe I just saw him clearly for the first time. He smiled, polite but small. "You look well," he said. I nodded. "I am." We didn't say much more. No apologies. No accusations. Just two people passing each other with the quiet understanding that their story had ended where it needed to. He didn't ask if I was seeing anyone. I think he knew better. That question was never about me. It was about whether I'd moved on fast enough for him to feel absolved. But I had nothing to offer him. Not anger. Not warmth. Just closure. And that was enough. Sometimes people ask me if I ever miss being part of a family. I tell them the truth. I never was. Not really. I was a fixture. A folded napkin at a formal dinner. An accessory that matched the curtains, but never the bloodline. I don't say it with bitterness, just accuracy. Because the absence of love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's measured in who's left out of the group text, who's seated at the edge of the photo, who never gets asked if they made it home safe. Once you learn to name that kind of neglect, you stop mistaking it for something softer. I didn't lose a family. I lost a facade. One night, I went down to the river with that wine bottle from Christmas Eve, the one I left on their porch, still unopened when I found it again months later. It had sat on my bookshelf like a relic. But that night, I walked to the edge of the water, cradled it like a goodbye, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to them. To the version of me who finally stopped knocking on doors that only opened halfway. Then I let it go. The bottle broke the surface with a muted splash, swallowed without ceremony. No audience. No grand farewell. Just release. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't angry anymore. Just free. I kept the silver ring. The one I bought after the sale closed. I still wear it when I need to remember who I became when I stopped waiting to be saved. People ask if it means anything, if it's a family heirloom or a promise ring. I smile and say, "It's mine." That usually ends the conversation, and I like that. Not everything needs to be explained to be respected. Not every survival needs a headline. Some victories are quiet. Some rebirths happen in rented apartments, over takeout and soft jazz, in the stillness after someone finally says, "No more." And those are the ones that last. Because they're real. Because they're yours. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment and share your own moment of walking away from a place or a person that never truly saw you. Like the video if her quiet strength stayed with you. And subscribe for more stories where the ending is earned, the silence is powerful, and justice doesn't need to shout to be felt. See you soon in our next story.